Welcome back to the Love and Cherish podcast with me, Laura Howe. My guest today is Bettina Arndt, an Australian writer, social commentator, and former clinical psychologist known for her controversial views on gender issues and men's rights. Bettina gained notoriety with her 2009 book, The Sex Diaries, in which, using diary excerpts from real couples, she delves into the common problems associated with mismatched libidos in long-term relationships. She now writes about modern men's issues such as false accusations of abuse, parental alienation, and biases in domestic violence laws. Hello, Bettina. It is absolutely lovely to see you. It's absolutely wonderful to have you on the podcast. Welcome. I've been a fan of yours for a very long time, so it really is a pleasure and a privilege to have you.
Laura, very nice to be here, and thank you for inviting me.
So I just wanted to say, and if you'd indulge me just a moment, I wanted to say just a massive thank you, because you did, I've said this to you before, but I wanted to say it publicly, that you did have a massive impact on mine and my husband's marriage. It was shortly after we'd had our first and only child, and we slipped into what I guess is quite a common phenomenon where in the craziness of or the kind of almost semi-feral state of early parenthood, we lost ourselves sexually. And it was your beautiful book, Sex Diaries, and your, not just that book, but your very beautiful and strong message about sex as a positive and crucial part of a healthy marriage that really did pull us out and set us back on track. So a sincere thank you for that. You really were a massive positive force for us.
It's always so nice to hear that. It's funny because I knew I was going to do this interview. I sat down on the weekend and read through, a lot of the Sex Diaries. I haven't read it. I wrote it 16 years ago, and it was actually lovely for me because I'd forgotten how powerful it is. I mean, I'm not talking about my book as such. But my book is based on diaries. I got 98 couples to keep diaries about how they negotiate sex in a marriage. And they're just extraordinary, those people. It was so thrilling for me to see them pour their hearts out about this very vexed area of relationships. And so you gave me a treat inadvertently, because I'd just forgotten. It was a very special period of my life when I decided to do this project, and just so exciting to do. And rereading it after all this time is just fascinating, because a lot has changed, of course, in the last nearly 2 decades, and that was interesting too.
I bet. Well, I love that. I love that this conversation prompted you to revisit such a beautiful piece of work. And it just seems so courageous. For some reason, I don't think that's changed. And perhaps we'll talk about that a bit in the conversation. But I think perhaps we could start with something that is a little closer to what you're currently facing or addressing, that men, it seems, are having a really difficult time of things. Soaring suicide rates. Our boys aren't doing particularly well in schools. In the family court system, men are losing. The way that men are portrayed in the media, I think you call it disgusting or dreadful male bashing, I think is your term, but that's something that I see. I see it in movies and in the news. It's like there's very little positivity when it comes to men in general. So my first question is, how have we got here? Why are we here, do you think?
There's a very simple answer to that, which is feminism, in my view. And I started off my early career calling myself a feminist, believing in equality. But feminism, as it is today, has got nothing to do with equality. It's got to do with advantaging women at the expense of men. And there's a very anti-male streak in, I suppose, the extreme feminists I'm talking about, but they're the ones who have control of our society here in Australia, and I think in many countries around the world. And they're the ones that are writing the laws. They're the ones that are leaning on government to spend money shaming boys in schools and teaching little girls to be victims. And, it starts very early, this a very aggressive attitude towards toxic masculinity and the idea that the men are the bad players in our society and women are eternally virtuous and good. And, I have been fighting this battle now for many decades of trying to draw attention to this, which of course makes you extremely unpopular.
Yes, it does seem to. You're not the first person to tell me that they're experiencing that trying to discuss these things means that, yes, you are an unsavory, you're deemed an unsavory character.
No, it's got worse and worse. I was working as a feature writer and opinion writer in all our major Australian newspapers and some magazines as well. And over the decades I was in that job, it just became more and more difficult to talk about what was happening to men. And it was all about the feminists gaining control over all our key institutions. And in the big newspapers, I used to work for the Australian, Sydney Morning Herald, very big Australian newspapers. They now have women editors firmly in place, gatekeeping what you're allowed to say. And certain topics they absolutely won't discuss. And it's quite extraordinary. And that's just one area. And the media is only part of it. The story, of course, we've got legislative changes going through all the time, tilting our justice system to favour victims, which always means women, at the expense of men, and to downplay traditional rights of protection for accused men. And that's another really worrying area. Our family court, you name it, one after another. Our institutions are lying down in the face of this feminist onslaught, and it's really quite scary.
It feels really scary. And if I might lead you on, because there's a link here that would be helpful in terms of just if I could just say a bit about my audience, because my focus is marriage essentially, and the fact that a lot of people really aren't having a very nice time in their marriages, and there are key themes, and sex or lack of it is one of them. And I wanted to ask you whether you feel that women are uneducated about what sex means to men, or whether it's as much that society and perhaps what you're saying, that feminism and the media has convinced them through this drip feed of negativity that men simply don't matter.
All that matters is women's needs and women's wants. And I think that's the message that is doing enormous damage in relationships, in marriages. The fact that women have enormously high expectations of what of their relationships, and they expect men to be able to provide often very unrealistic lists, a shopping list of demands. And it's just, we see the evidence that women today are generally very unhappy. That's the most extraordinary thing. We expected feminism to improve women's happiness in life. Do you remember back, you're too young to remember this, but early second wave feminism was all, the huge emphasis on how miserable women were. They were popping Valium, and they were not being fulfilled, and they didn't have enough opportunities in life. And by opening the doors, the idea was everyone's lives would get better. Well, now all the evidence is that women generally are much more miserable than they used to be. And a lot of it's got to do with these high expectations for their relationships that men can't possibly fulfill. And I think social media contributing very much to that. As you say, the drip, 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 the constant negative information that's fed into women look at their relationships very harshly. I've talked about the fact that, if you think back to the 1950s when women were stuck in relationships where they couldn't escape. If they had children, they had nowhere to go. They couldn't, most of them weren't working. They couldn't afford to leave and go out, the relationship and go off by themselves, couldn't support themselves. And in that circumstance, you might as well make the most of what this relationship you're in. And I think there was a bit of rose-coloured glasses that was operating in many relationships then. Not everybody was miserable. Plenty of women made the most, many of our mothers, or maybe your grandmother, made the most of the situation and looked for the good in the marriage. And that's what people were taught.
Yeah.
And then it all changed. Women got the right to went out into the workforce, and they got the right to walk out of relationships where they weren't happy. And I think that changed the whole equation, because that made them look much more harshly at what they were being offered and much more critically. And the result is that an awful lot of women feel let down, feel that the man is not coming up to their expectations. And then of course, we're wonderfully good. I always say we're wonderfully good at gnawing the bone. If our husbands are irritating us, we talk endlessly to our friends about all the things he's doing wrong. We go on, go on social media. We feed that irritation and disappointment through our relationships with women, and it really undermines the marriage. I've always had a very jaundiced view, if you like, about female friendships. And I feel female friendships are terribly important. They've supported me throughout my life, but I've really seen the negative aspect of that in how women can undermine other women's relationships. I don't know whether I told you, Laura, that I spent 5 years, a couple of decades ago, as a dating coach, online dating coach. This is when online dating had just was just really happening. And all my friends started to come to me and said, would I help them write profiles, which of course was something that came very naturally to me. I've been working as a journalist for 50 years, or 40 years then, and I, obviously have had an enormous interest in how men and women get on, and particularly in men and what men want. So in some ways, I was sort of ideal to help women sell themselves to men, to present themselves to men. And I wrote, I had a lovely time writing profiles for my friends. And then I thought, I'll try this as a sort of little business. And it was utterly fascinating, very difficult, because I was mainly dealing with women over 40, many of them over 50, very tough dating market. But one of the things I learned very quickly is that women's friends were their worst enemies in this situation. We'd finally get them to meet some guy who interested them a bit, and then they'd go and talk to their friends and, he's not nearly good enough for you. This constant idea that, you can't possibly go out with a plumber, or, he doesn't match you economically. That's one of the big problems that a lot of women would say, all the men I'm meeting are broke. Why are they all broke? Because women have taken their houses. These are all divorced men.
And their jobs.
Given away their houses. They've gotten, they are broke. They've got hardly anything left. If you get divorced in your 50s and 60s as a male, you never recover financially. Most men have no hope of getting back to anything like their previous standard of living. They don't do very well in the dating market. Anyway, that's all a diversion, but it sort of speaks to your point about women's expectations of their relationships and why it's now such a struggle.
Yeah, and I hear and see everything. I can confirm everything that you're saying, because I see it in the counselling room. I meet hundreds of couples, and a huge amount of the time there are obviously exceptions where one of the couple have perhaps a personality disorder, but more often than not these people are predominantly decent, and you've got what I see is women with predominantly a decent man, and they're just not happy with him. It's not you're absolutely right. Their standards are so high. And I'd argue that what you're saying as well, that they are themselves unhappy, but partly I think because they're not doing their own work. They're women have been somewhat let off the hook in terms of self-development, so I think that's playing a part in it as well. But I can completely see what you're saying, that women, exactly, their standards have become completely unrealistic. It's all about being happy. It's not about meaning anymore. It's not about doing a good good job, because I think, women, again, I think that we've culturally, morally, we've gone off track. We're not talking about our duties and our responsibilities in marriage as mothers, as wives, in the same way that we used to. And I think that's playing out in marriages. So I have a very direct question for you, because one of the biggest topics that I'm discussing is sexlessness in marriage, or very, very, if not completely sexless. And when I say sexless, I'm talking sometimes, multiple years. Men are suffering multiple years of sexlessness in their marriages. I wonder if you have any advice to those men.
Yeah, well, of course, that was the central topic for the book we were talking about earlier, the Sex Diaries, which was really about trying to address that issue. I'd spent my life listening to men talking about having to beg for sex, having to grovel for sex, or having sex doled out to them like meaty bites to a dog. Do you know what I mean? Meaty bite is a little, pet treat. And that you're supposed to be grateful if your wife deigns to have sex with you. And men talking about that, how degrading that is for them. That's been the message I've had for years and years and years. And I thought it'd be so interesting to get men to actually talk more openly about that. And even though I went out just to recruit couples to talk about, the whole negotiation around the sex, that was certainly the central message, the sex star men. And their stories just blew me away. Many of them said, I've never told anyone about this before. It was, I think, a really emotional experience to talk about how that all felt to them. I remember once I was talking on the radio about all of this, and a man rang me later, or must have written to me later, and said, I sat there with tears rolling down my cheeks because I'd never heard anyone express what my life was like. And the amazing thing in all of this is men still stay in these marriages. Yeah. I had a man who went for 16 years with no sex in his marriage, and he adored his wife, and he described lying there, not even being allowed to look at her, when, certainly never looking at her naked, but even, he was barely allowed any, to have any intimacy at all. And of course, what happens in these relationships is if he comes to get a cuddle, she thinks, oh my God, he wants sex, and she doesn't want it. Right. So all cuddles, all kisses, everything is off. And it's, one man said it feels like, the 6 inches in our bed feels like 1,000 miles. And he said, it's like the Gulf War in our bed. This idea that there's this huge gap between them. And it's such a sad thing for men. Men hope and pray they're going to have a lover. They're going to marry someone who will be their lover for life, ideally. They don't want to be married to a sister or a roommate. And finding themselves in a sexless marriage is utterly degrading and disappointing for them. Agreed. And that was, I suppose, my great achievement was to have men's voices. And so many women wrote to me and said, that they had no idea that's what it meant to them. Because women think, for goodness sake, it's just sex. Go run the oval, or have a cold shower. And of course, every man knows he can masturbate. It's not about getting his rocks off. It's about wanting to be wanted. And the flip side, of course, is feeling constantly rejected. And I did have 1 in 10 of my couples were women in that situation, women who were not getting nearly as much sex as they would have liked. And boy, did they struggle with rejection. I was amazed at the resilience of men who would again and again pick themselves up off the floor when she'd knocked them away or slapped them away. and they'd be, trying again, trying to seduce her, trying to find some way of reintroducing sex in their lives. I always think of those, those little clouds in the side circus sideshow. They get knocked over, and these men, they pop up again. Whereas the women, one rejection and many of them just didn't never initiate again. And I was astonished at in that, out of those 10 women who were in that situation, I think 4 of the relationships broke up in the year they were writing for me, because they just absolutely couldn't deal with not being wanted. And particularly in a society where so many of their women friends are saying to them, "Oh, I wish he'd leave me alone. He's all over me all the time." And therefore, if your husband isn't interested in you, you feel really, rejected and peculiar.
It's interesting, Bettina, because what I feel you're telling me is that really it's almost, and maybe I'll be shot down in flames for saying this, but it's almost not for the men to solve, is it? It's perhaps that women need to re-educate themselves or educate themselves. We need to understand men better, and to understand this very healthy, beautiful desire that they have for this to be a frequent experience in their lives, for it to be part of their lives as men, that it's an absolutely essential part of their nature. And
what I always think is so weird about this is, women do ridiculous things to try to look after their husbands. I mean, women who care about their husbands will, cook 3-course meals and, shop through the shopping centre for those favourite underpants, whatever it is.
Yeah.
When a 10-minute bonk every now and then would make that man so much happier than all the stuff they do for him. I mean, it's just madness. And the fact we've allowed feminism to redefine what this part of marriage is all about, to see it as something incredibly precious and different, whereas all sorts of other areas of the relationship, we know we have to negotiate. You cook him meatballs, you don't like meatballs, but he loves them, or you do all sorts of things, and he does things for you, and that's what we assume. But sex is so special, and it has to be treated as something where women have absolute right to say no, and they can't possibly be told that they should negotiate there as well. I remember a female doctor wrote to me and said she tells her patients, it's not root canal therapy. I mean, it's not like we're asking women to do anything arduous or dangerous. It's something that comes very naturally. It's perfect. And I'm not saying suffer through painful, unwanted sex. But I'm saying that, sometimes you can just give pleasure. That's one thing you can do, just to show your partner you care about them. Or, I mean, if you're going ahead to try to have intercourse, you have to just try it and see. I always talk about putting the canoe in the water and starting paddling. And sometimes when you start, you will find desire kicks in later. And this is the sort of just do it idea, which was came as a real revelation to me in a sense, because I discovered this when I was writing my book. I discovered a Canadian gynecology professor had been doing work with women who had no desire for years and years and years, and she discovered that many of them realised that they could have sexual pleasure without desire. That provided they had what she called a willingness to be receptive, which means the knowledge that once I get started, desire will kick in. Now, it won't always happen. If it doesn't happen, I don't think it's a good idea to have intercourse when you're not, you realise you're not really in the mood. But, it's an intriguing thing, this discovery, that if you put the canoe in the water and start paddling, sometimes things will kick in. And
like exercise. That's how I liken it to exercise. It's the same for me pretty much every time. I very rarely think, well, it's not entirely true.
Feel like it, do you?
Sometimes I just don't, Bettina. And then, within 10, 15 minutes, I'm running somewhere or cycling somewhere or whatever. I'm generally having a very good time. Yeah,
but so that, obviously it has to be negotiated, and, you have a right to opt out if it's not working for you. And, of course, when I talked about this publicly in Australia, all hell broke loose. There was a blog saying, "Fuck you, Bettina Arndt, you're a rape cheerleader," Because to suggest that women should ever just do it for the sake, but I'm not saying just do it for him. It's not about sacrificing yourself for him. It's about doing it for you, because many women in this situation will say, when I have sex, when I make the effort to get my head in the right place and just do it, I'm always surprised to think how good that is for me. I enjoy it, but also for our relationship. And I think, why don't I do it more often? And I think there's this enormous obstacle in women's heads of thinking, I don't feel like it, and therefore I'm a woman, I mustn't have sex when I don't feel like it. I mean, this is the trouble, this madness that's infected our marriages.
It is madness. And I also think you're perhaps hiding, again, issues of your own. I've said to my husband for a long time now, for me, to be somebody who remains sexual, to have sex as a regular feature of my existence, I've had to address or keep myself in a good spot in lots of ways. It means that I look after myself physically, psychologically. We keep our relationship in good order so that maintain, so that we can maintain that area of our life. I just think that you've got a lot of yourself in order if you're maintaining a positive sexuality through the eras of your life. You've got so much in place, and I just think that's a sort of not perhaps discussed enough thing. I'm very aware of time, Bettina, and I just want to kind of move the conversation on slightly, if it's okay with you, and sort of perhaps finish with, what would you say to men who are in an perhaps emotionally abusive marriage? They're very, very unhappy in their marriage. They're considering leaving, but they're very afraid that if they do, they will lose everything in court, and perhaps, not just financially, but perhaps their children as well.
Yeah. Look, it's a terrible situation men are in, because many of them will lose everything. I mean, if a woman doesn't want the marriage to end and the man leaves, we have absolutely weaponized our family court system to enable her to take out that anger and destroy him. And all it takes is some false allegations about violence or sexual abuse or abuse of children, whatever it is, and she can get him removed from the house. She can get him put in a situation where he's nowhere not allowed near her or the children, often for years. I mean, I don't know quite how it compares to Britain, but I know similar situations apply. In Australia, if you're in that situation, you often have to pay to be allowed to have supervised contact with your children, which I think is utterly obscene. And that's a system which is so horrific for men, for dads, having to sit there with someone taking notes on how you're interacting with your kids, which will be used against you in a court situation. And it's a beautiful means of alienating fathers still more from their children. And, this is why we have this soaring suicide rate in Australia. We have we have 9 people killing themselves every day in Australia, 7 of them are men. We've got really good coroner's report data showing it's linked to relationship breakup and all the consequences of relationship breakup, the financial problems, but men having to spend everything they've ever earned to try to fight in the courts to see their children. I mean, the whole situation is just out of control. With domestic violence allegations in one of our states in Queensland, the police are receiving a domestic violence call every 3 minutes. And most of those are related to either false allegations or trivia. Allegations of emotional abuse. He yelled at me. He kicked the dog bowl. That's enough. An allegation like that. It doesn't have to be physical violence. It can just be, I'm afraid he could be violent and he will be removed. I mean, I don't even know how we're going to begin to address this. And it makes me, I receive hundreds of letters every month from men and women and, the mothers of these men, grandmothers who haven't seen their grandchildren for years and years, grandmothers and grandparents who have to remortgage their houses to help the sons' legal battles. I mean, this area is just horrific now. And that's the consequence. I once had a man who was in a relationship where he'd had no sex for many years. And I had this chat thing on my website of people being able to talk to each other. And he went on there and said, should I leave or should I go? And asked other men, exactly the problem you raise. Is it worth the risk of not seeing my children anymore? Oh, it's just extraordinary to read. I mean, men were all over the place, but a lot of men said it's not worth the risk. Men are absolutely tiptoeing in their marriages today. And they know that she has all the power to destroy their lives if he does the wrong thing. And it's just terrifying to me.
Yeah, me too, Bettina. Me too. Yes. So the is there hope? Do you have hope, Bettina? Because I feel somewhat scared that if we don't course correct as a species, because obviously there's the ramifications on children, which is of profound interest to me. What on earth are we doing to our children, and why are we not somewhat disgraced by the way that things have changed? So yes, do you feel we are doomed, or do you see that we might work this out?
I'm pretty pessimistic at the moment. Sadly, I hope it'll turn around, but I'm not sure I'll be around to see it. And I don't know what's going to make the change. In Australia particularly, I think we've got some of the most ferocious feminists in the world. And they've done such a brilliant job. Did a video last week with a woman who was working in a university, but her job was to teach police about domestic violence. And she used an evidence-based approach, teaching police to go into homes and look at what they saw in front of them. Who looked as if that was the perpetrator? What was the evidence that he or she had been violent or aggressive or abusive? Mm-hmm. And to make their decisions about arresting someone according to what they saw. And she did a video with me about her work, saying that the police were telling her they were seeing just as many women perpetrators as male. She's been fired from her job in the last week because there was immediately chat on the internet saying we're going to get her, and the university's caved in. The police have announced that they no longer, having supported her and chosen her for that job, saying she wanted to promote evidence-based policing. They now say they're doing trauma-informed policing, which, of course, is the feminist buzzword for, believe all women, no matter how women behave, whatever they do is right. It's terrifying. And, I don't know what's going to change it. And I've been pulling together, I've had hundreds of people volunteering to help me with this mighty battle I'm involved in, and we've started a thing called the Arndt Army, bringing together all these volunteers. Grandmothers, and God only knows, people from all over the country, men and women, to try to work out what can we do. And we're working hard to try to find some solutions now.
Well, I love that you're doing that. That's a relief. It's always such a relief to hear that somebody sees what's going on, because so many people, I feel like I'm living in a different movie. I feel like I'm just surrounded by people who have a completely different conception of reality. So I don't know what to make of that. So yes, it's always a relief to know that somebody, and that there are organizations springing up to consider what we might do. That's a relief to hear. So thank you.
Well, it's always good for me to have the opportunity to spread the message. And, I have a lot of overseas people supporting me and, keen to help in whatever ways they can. And I think we all have to get together and fight back is the answer.
I agree.
As you say, particularly for the sake of our children. We have, in Australia, a tiny little country, we have 1 million children growing up without fathers. This cannot go on. And we have to
No.
do something about the damage this is
Yeah.
causing to our society.
We do, and I can't help but think that it must have as much, at least as much, to do with having conversations, serious conversations about where we are. And I do think as well that we need to consider whether we have, as individuals, been influenced by this toxicity, this divisive, awful. I don't know. It's almost a sort of entity in and of itself. This force that seeks to destroy the relationship between men and women. Because I can't. It seems obvious to me that nobody benefits when men and women pit themselves against one another.
Yeah.
So that's the tact that I'm taking, is that one woman at a time, I have these kinds of conversations where we explore whether it might be wiser to be in awe of each other and to be very respectful of each other and to be on the same team.
And stop the war, This constant promotion of this gender war is so destructive for everybody and so damaging to our relationships. And, I always think that how many women who are like this actually are raising sons, and don't they think about the world that they're bringing these boys into, what it's like to grow up in a world where you're always on the back foot and seen as this person who's likely to do damage to, to other people. I mean, it's just a horrible thing we're doing to boys. One of the things I did in the last few years is started an organisation called Mothers of Sons. And I had a whole lot of mums whose sons have been through court situations, been accused of various things. And all these mums came together to stand up for boys and men. And I think it's really important that women who feel like this also get together and, work to change our society.
Agree. Bettina, thank you so much for your time. I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed this conversation. I could talk to you for many hours. Where can people find you, Bettina? When I've no doubt they'll want to. Where can they locate you?
I'm mainly writing. That's my most preferred occupation, is to pour my heart out about what is happening here. And I have a team of researchers who help me put together data that is often really hard to find. So I blog on Substack, and I have a lot of people, joining the conversations on that blog. I have the Arndt Army has a Twitter, an X channel. Maybe can you put these different addresses up somewhere, Laura?
Absolutely.
You can have a look at Mothers of Sons. We put up a huge amount of information, advice from mums to mothers about the battles your sons might face. So I have my own YouTube channel where I regularly interview people, police who are whistleblowers, or tell the stories of what's going on in our society. So I'm busy.
You are busy, and you've been busy for a long time as well. So really, sincerely, just thank you for your contribution to society and to the world generally. It's quite incredible when you look at the span of your career and how hard you've worked to fight these battles. Thank you so much, and thanks again for your time.